Episode 26, the Average Joe Sports Show, college football and changes at Nebraska.
I'm Mitch Sherman. The Huskers have got a quarterbacks coach, Glenn Thomas from the Pittsburgh Steelers, reuniting with Matt Rule.
Hi, I'm Bill Doleman, and Nebraska has a quarterback who is dazzling at the Polynesian Bowl. We'll talk about Dylan Raiola.
And it's Elijah Herbel here. We'll also talk about Nick Saban. He's out at Bama retiring, replaced by Kalen DeBoer. That and a whole lot more on the Average Joe Sports Show.
Back into it. It's the Average Joe Sports Show podcast. Chris Schmidt and Mitch Sherman, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, as we are into episode 26. Give us a like, give us a follow with the Average Joe Sports Show. Subscribe on Twitter, the AJ Sports Show, the AJ Sports Pod on Twitter, and find us on Spotify and iTunes. Mitch, some breaking news with the Nebraska football staff. Let's get kicked off there.
Yeah, Nebraska's made a hire at quarterbacks coach, which we've discussed and talked about for several weeks now. The season's been over it depends on your perspective. It feels like it in some ways it's been like 7 months, and in other ways it feels like it just happened the other day. But we've been talking about this for a while, that Matt Rule wanted to move Marcus Satterfield to coach the tight ends, which was his original plan. When Rule took over a year ago, they were unable to get things done with the quarterbacks coach that they wanted last year. This year, they got it done with Glenn Thomas, who spent the 2023 season as an offensive assistant with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then before that, he coordinated the offense at Arizona State and UNLV and spent 5 seasons alongside Matt Rule at Baylor and Temple as an offensive coordinator for part of that, as a quarterbacks coach for part of that time. So he's worked with Matt Ryan with the Atlanta Falcons before he connected with Rule at Temple. And then all of the quarterbacks like P.J. Walker and Charlie Brewer that played for Matt Rule at his previous college stop. So this is the guy who's going to coach Dylan Raiola. And Nebraska's got him, and Satterfield is heading to tight ends. Josh Martin is going to go back to being an analyst on this staff, and it looks like the full-time coaching staff, barring more of a shakeup that's not yet in the works, is set for the 24 season.
Well, pretty big news, Bill, with this addition, and you've got a really talented young quarterback coming in, Dylan Raiola and Danny Kalen. You also have Harburg that's here, and you know what? That quarterback coach can really set things off in the right way. You get the right one.
Well, it's significant because you have somebody with ties to Matt Rule again, so there's a trust there that has been so important as the staff has come together over the last year and couple of months now. But the connection to the NFL is something that Matt Rule has sold since he got the job at Nebraska. That the job isn't just to get guys to the NFL; it's to get them that second contract. So when you look at Glenn Thomas's resume, having worked with Matt Ryan, as Mitch said, with the Atlanta Falcons for a number of years. He was an analyst there before he became the quarterbacks coach for 3 years, then went back into the college game, gets back to the NFL again. So you've got somebody who has those ties both to the collegiate game, but also to the NFL. And think about the tumult that there was in Pittsburgh this past year, in which they had the firing of the offensive coordinator and Matt Canada mid-year. It didn't look like the Steelers were going to make the playoffs. Oh, by the way, Kenny Pickett gets hurt. You've got Mitch Trubisky, and you end the season with Mason Rudolph. So for him to get back in the NFL and go through a season like that and still help a team get into the postseason, that does speak pretty well for his 1 year back on Mike Tomlin's staff. And now that he comes back to familiar territory with Matt Rule, not necessarily Nebraska being familiar, but understanding the coach that he's going to be working with, and the relationship they had over the years. I think it's a pretty significant hire. It may not be the big name like Dana Holgorsen, who we talked about last week, but in terms of stability, knowledge, loyalty, trust, this is probably the safe and secure hire for Matt Rule to make at this time. And if you're Dylan Raiola and you're coming in and you've got a coach who has coached in the NFL with some notable people, that makes your decision to come to Nebraska all the better.
That Pittsburgh season sounds like a Nebraska season in recent years. What the Steelers went through at the quarterback position and on the offensive staff, I feel like I've lived through that for a while. The other thing to consider is that this dynamic that Nebraska is going to have with Rule as the top dog, of course, Marcus Satterfield calling the offense, designing the offense, and then Glenn Thomas coaching the most important position on the offense. They've been together before. This was in place at Baylor, so they've worked together. There's not going to be the kind of learning curve that you don't want to have a big learning curve as Nebraska now moves into the portion of the calendar year where Dylan Raiola and Danny Kalen arrive on campus. Dylan will be here next week when he gets done throwing 70-yard bombs at the Polynesian Bowl in Hawaii. But Danny's there. They're starting winter conditioning, and then next week classes start, and we'll have mat drills and spring practice pretty soon. So if there's not a learning curve among the coaches who are in charge of this thing offensively, all the better with the young players in the system. And that looks to be the case with Rule, Satterfield, and Thomas.
Well, it's interesting to me that these two, Marcus Satterfield and Glenn Thomas, have already gone through this once before at Baylor, where Glenn Thomas was the quarterback coach for the Atlanta Falcons, which is a nice little gig in the NFL, coaching Matt Ryan, being your first stop in the NFL. But then he comes to Temple, and Marcus Satterfield's coaching the quarterbacks. They bump him off of that in addition to his offensive coordinator roles. They bump him to running backs. Then Glenn Thomas comes in and takes over the quarterbacks back at Temple, I believe, in 2015. So this isn't even the first time we've had this kind of weird transition of power in the quarterback's position. They've already done it once before. This is familiar territory for them. And I think that's a positive whenever you talk about, Mitch, the fact that you have a five-star quarterback coming in that you really can't mess up. They've already done this before. They've already had this transition of power, and I think that's going to make this next couple of months all that much easier.
Yeah, interesting to look at Charlie Brewer and PJ Walker and some of their successful numbers and how they kind of helped spearhead that transformation, that turnaround, and both quarterbacks in both programs with Glenn Thomas and Brewer. His season in 2018, we're talking 7 rushing touchdowns, 3,000 yards throwing, and right around 19 to 20 touchdown passes. Mitch, what type of offense do you envision here with this triumvirate? Rules want Sat's comfort level, and then what Thomas does best, obviously whisper to quarterbacks. But as we talk about this triangle here, what does it then look like on the arm of a Dylan Raiola, and with what we know is coming back or has been added to the Nebraska offense?
Yeah, now that we know it's Thomas, I think we can start to dig into his offenses a little bit when he's been in charge. Look at that Arizona State offense in 2022, the UNLV offense in the couple of years before that, and see what he did, what he liked, the kind of routes that his receivers ran, how run heavy were they? Did they use a fullback? How many tight ends did they use? This news, as we're taping right now, it broke less than an hour ago, so haven't been through the film yet, but I certainly know what those guys ran at Temple and at Baylor from 2015 to 2019, and it was a pro-style attack. At Baylor, they did some RPO stuff because Brewer, was a mobile guy. Same thing with PJ Walker, though they didn't run as much RPO in the American Conference at Temple. You're not going to see that a lot. You're going to go with what your personnel dictates, and Dylan Raiola is a pro-style quarterback. He's got a huge arm. They're going to want to showcase that thing, and for a coach who's been in the NFL, and we've mentioned Matt Ryan a few times now, I don't think we should go overboard on that. And Nebraska's not going to model its offense necessarily in 2024 after the Matt Ryan Atlanta Falcons, but it's a good place to start because Dylan does possess an NFL caliber arm. We'll see if he's got all of the other parts that are required to be an NFL quarterback in the future, but he's got the arm talent unquestionably and can make all the kind of throws that a quarterback's coach, an offensive coordinator, and a head coach would want to see made if they're running an NFL-style pro-style passing attack.
Yeah, you don't want to get too wrapped up in the Falcons thing because Matt Ryan was throwing the ball to Roddy White and Julio Jones, and I think the latter stages of Tony Gonzalez's career. So But somebody
Carter Nelson's coming in.
Somebody still has to get the ball from A to B. So they did a decent job of that during maybe the glory days of the Falcons, given what's transpired this past season. Not to be lost, though, if you go back to prior to Pittsburgh, as you mentioned, Mitch, he was at Arizona State, which was kind of a lost season for the Sun Devils. And forgive me for not knowing the five deep on the Arizona State quarterback list of 2022, but they did complete like 70% of their passes. And if Nebraska can be efficient in its passing game, it doesn't have to necessarily be dynamic in Dylan Raiola's or Danny Kalen's first season at Nebraska. But if there's an efficiency and a competency, that's going to be a much better step forward than, worrying about how spectacular it's going to be. And we're all pleased that Dylan Raiola won the punt, pass, and kick competition at the Polynesian Bowl. So, and let's face it, the kid's not going to come back to Nebraska until the snow's melted. But, I look at that efficient passing game at Arizona State during a down season as being another thing. I think you look at the stat sheet for a Glenn Thomas coach, quarterbacks, as a real plus. Just be efficient in the passing game.
Bill, how could you forget the two-headed monster at Arizona State back 2 seasons ago of Trenton Bourquette and Emory Jones, the two-headed quarterback monster?
It was easy for me to forget it, okay? But I just looked at the numbers.
But you look at those numbers; they're impressive. Almost 67% if you round up passing, 18 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, over 250 passing yards a game. Obviously, people are going to go there. Defenses in the Pac-12 aren't what they are in the Big Ten. But regardless, in the 3-9 season, those are impressive numbers from quarterbacks that are otherwise pretty forgettable names. No offense to those two if they are listening to the show.
I apologize.
I don't apologize, or I do apologize, but somewhat forgettable two quarterbacks for Arizona State with good numbers.
Well, he almost coached Jaden Daniels at Arizona State. They were like two ships passing in the night and I'm just looking this up now because, Bill, you got me thinking about Arizona State. And Jaden Daniels entered the portal on February 17th of 2022, right there at the very beginning of Thomas's tenure as the ASU offensive coordinator. So they would have been in Tempe for a short period of the offseason together ahead of that 22 season before Jaden Daniels went on to LSU, and then in his second year had one of the greatest statistical seasons in NCAA history and won the Heisman Trophy a couple of months ago. So we don't know how much interaction the two of them had, and if Glenn Thomas actually taught Jaden Daniels everything that he knew and then took to LSU in the 2 months that they were together at Arizona State. I'm sure that's the case, but they didn't get the opportunity to work together for whatever the reason was. Well, we'll ask Glenn Thomas about that the first time we get to meet him in Lincoln. Why he couldn't keep Jaden Daniels at ASU?
Yeah, well, LSU, Arizona State, NCAA.
Right. He made a good decision and won the Heisman.
Yeah, he was good. Is Nebraska done, fellas? We'll get to some of the staff changes with Nebraska here in a little bit, but could you see other names added? And I ask this in reference to Dana Holgorsen. I assume Dana's got some other suitors or could have some other suitors if he wants to get back in. He could just put his feet up and take the year off. You've got your quarterback coach now in Glenn Thomas, but what else do you possibly add, or are you done if you're Matt Rule adding to your room, your analyst room?
Well, Holgorsen did still visit Nebraska a couple of weeks ago. That wasn't a mirage at the Devaney Center that we saw. He was actually there, and he was talking to Nebraska about maybe this job, maybe it was an analyst's position. And, I think Nebraska is content to let Dana wait this out, especially now that the important position, at least in terms of what you can do in the offseason, they're out recruiting now. It's January. There's a period where the coaches are on the road. And interestingly, we saw that Philip Simpson was on the road. He's a defensive analyst. He was on the road this week in Miami, which has become an important recruiting area again for Nebraska. The Huskers signed 5 from Dade County, from Miami, in the 2024 class. Several of them are early enrollees and are in Lincoln, while Simpson is back on the road. And they were able to do that because they took Josh Martin before in these couple of days before Thomas is able to get to Lincoln. They took Martin and took him off the road, put him back in the analyst position, and it opened up for a short period of time another full-time spot to be able to go on the road, or another traveling position essentially that only full-time coaches are allowed. So, they're still doing some things, moving some chess pieces, things like that. As for Holgorsen, I think people have probably noticed that there have been some significant moves in college football in the coaching world over the last week or so. Now, all of a sudden, since we last talked, Kalen DeBoer is the coach at Alabama, and Jed Fish is the coach at Washington. So these set off dominoes. Arizona has hired Brian Brennan, the San Jose State coach. So sorry, Chubba Purdy, you commit to San Jose State, and then your coach is gone 2 days later to go to the Big 12 in Arizona. And it's like, what are we even saying here? Sorry about my dog, but there may be more pieces that fall, more pieces that change. And if something comes up for Dana Holgorsen, maybe he goes and takes a job at an opening that he didn't foresee when he came to watch Nash Hutmacher wrestle a couple weeks ago.
Is it possible that that Dana Holgorsen either A, takes a year off? I think there might be a probability of that, given he's probably still collecting a check. But is it possible that maybe he does, like some coaches do, and goes into an analyst type role in the NFL? With all the moving that's been going on, and there's still more that could still happen. I mean, Sirianni, after what happened with the Eagles in Tampa, is all of a sudden on the hottest seat in the NFL. Is it possible that, sometimes coaches do that? They'll get away from the college game, find out what's going on at the NFL level. I think Frank Solich did a little bit of that after he left Nebraska before taking the Ohio job, if you go, way back a couple of decades. And that would not surprise me either, just to kind of get a lay of the land and, get a better idea of what, the pros are looking for when you get your next opportunity to be a head coach. Will that be a top job in college coaching? I don't know, but, maybe that's something that Holgorsen is more interested in doing now, as opposed to jumping right back into a job in college that might be opening up on an emergency basis.
Or alternatively, maybe he's waiting to see if I was going to contact him for the offensive coordinator role. Kidding.
Hey, how about Paul Chryst during that? Paul Chryst is not going to Iowa. He's staying at Texas as an analyst. So seemingly the decision for Paul Chryst, the former Wisconsin coach, was go to Iowa and run the offense, or be in a non-coaching off-field role at Texas moving into the SEC, and he chose Texas. So Kirk Ferentz is having a hard time filling that position. And I don't think that's – and now Holgorsen is an Iowa native and got his start in coaching in Iowa. They may want to look that way, but I don't know that his passing style necessarily jives with what Kirk wants to do offensively.
I think his offense might give Kirk Ferentz a brain aneurysm.
I could see him. I could see him testing the NFL waters. It wouldn't require, recruiting is off the table. You're in the NFL and you get who you get. So I don't think that would break Dana's heart if he were put in a coaching position where he didn't have to recruit, which is perhaps why an analyst job in college would appeal to him. But hey, if the Dallas Cowboys come calling and want to make him an offensive assistant under Bill Belichick, then maybe he'll go work for Jerry Jones for a year.
So what you're saying, Rich, and what the feel I'm getting is essentially Nebraska is allowing Dana to say, hey, this is here if you want it, but enjoy your vacation, enjoy a couple months off. We know it's been a tough stretch at Houston. You probably want to kick your feet up. If some other jobs come calling, we'll let you explore those, but Nebraska's here for you if you want it. That's kind of the feel.
I do think that is a pretty accurate description of the situation right now.
I just want to see Dana and Bill Belichick converse. I mean, I think that'd be pretty marvelous with Hard Knocks, if and when that it would ever happen, if Belichick
when Belichick opens his door to Hard Knocks, let me know.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Has he done that? He hasn't done that. I don't want to.
Absolutely
completely
not.
Misrepresent the situation. I wouldn't think he would do that.
It's the Average Joe Sports Show, and Mitch Sherman with the news today. Glenn Thomas, new quarterbacks coach at Nebraska. Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Find us on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. Give us a follow and subscribe on YouTube, the AJ Sports Show, Spotify and iTunes for the audio portion of the podcast you want to download and tell friends about. Let's go to some maneuvers with Nebraska football with their staff. You have the Thomas News. That's an addition. You have Mike Wallace, Gordon Thomas, no longer a part of the Nebraska staff directory. That's Mike Wallace, Director of Football Advancement, Gordon Thomas, Director of Football Operations, and this is in the wake of Omar Hale and another staff member, Mitch, that no longer with Nebraska.
Yeah, there have been a number of moves. You can add James Heiss, who was an assistant strength coach under Corey Campbell. He's left to go to Georgia Southern as a strength coach there. And Omar Hales was, I think, had a higher profile than some of the others that we've mentioned. CJ Cavazos has been around and had his hands in quite a few areas of Nebraska's operations. In fact, Cavazos and Mike Wallace both were instrumental in the documentary style series that we saw Nebraska produce during training camp. Matt Rule mentioned both of those guys as playing roles in that. So, those are the kind of things that these positions entailed. Omar Hales definitely interacted quite a bit with recruits and with recruiting prospects, uncommitted players, committed players. You often saw him show up, his Twitter handle or his Instagram show up in the social media posts of the players. Had a personality that has a personality. He's still around, just not coaching at Nebraska. Has a personality that meshes well with those kids and has a talent for being able to connect with them. But these are mid-level jobs, and in some cases of the people who have left the Nebraska staff this offseason, they're even low-level jobs, and you're going to see that because Matt Rule has a staff that is twice the size, if not larger, than what any coach who came before him had. So there's going to be churn, there's going to be turnover. He wants the people who work for him to advance, and I'm not saying that every departure here was mutual or was initiated by the staffer. But for the most part, Rule is looking for the people who work for him to be able to advance their careers. And in some of the cases, I think that's what you're seeing here.
Isn't it also possible that there might be a little more streamlining after year one? The foundation's been put in place. There may be backstories to all of these transitions, but Nebraska had the second or third largest staff in the Big Ten, behind I think Michigan and maybe parallel to what Ohio State has. And after year one is in place, and if you look down that staff directory, there were some job titles that seem to be very similar in wording to, from one to the other, that maybe some of those positions aren't necessarily jobs that you have to have duplication or near duplication, that if you can get that more down to, again, trust is a huge thing there, but get it down to mid-30s, something along those lines, and you're still twice what Nebraska used to have back in the past, and maybe twice what some staffs currently have in major college football. But to get year one going and to get every stone turned and every footing in place to build a foundation, maybe you needed all those, and maybe now not so much.
Well, yeah, I think it's about efficiency, and also consider that Tony White got a $600,000 raise this year, and you've just replaced Josh Martin, who was the low earner on the football staff, with Glenn Thomas, who is going to command a bigger salary coming from the NFL and with the 20-plus years of coaching experience that he's got. So there's some Donovan Raiola also got a significant raise before the 2023 season. So there is an increase in the salary pool of the full-time assistant coaches. but Nebraska, money's not really, when it comes to paying staff, money's not really a limiting factor. And that's just the reality of the Big Ten and the SEC right now. It is everywhere else, but in those two conferences, it's not. So I think if you see any kind of a reduction in staff size, it's more related to like what you mentioned, Bill, and just finding ways to be efficient. I actually don't know that they will reduce the staff. I think they'll restructure it in some ways so that there aren't 6 or 7 people in the recruiting and personnel department who seem to have similar titles and similar job descriptions. You might add a couple of strength coaches and take somebody away from recruiting and personnel. You might add to the job description and responsibilities of someone in administration, and then, take away from another place. Something may go under the purview of the whole athletic department, and instead of being a football specific job. They're also moving into, at some point here in 2024, preferably for Nebraska early in 2024, the new building that already houses the locker room and is about to house the weight room and the training table and the football coaching offices. So that's not really what you do when you start to reduce the staff size. If anything, it might be bigger by the time the season kicks off next year. But yes, Matt Rule, I think, will have a better handle on what everybody's doing and how to make it run like a smooth operation.
And Mitch, do you think it's fair to say that this could be a year-by-year process that always happens, kind of based on where the program is at? Because you think about the first year of a rebuild, you want to have a lot of recruiting. You want to make sure that you don't leave any stone unturned whenever, you've been coming off a whole bunch of 3-9, 4-8 seasons. You need to be able to find some diamonds in the rough, and that changes based on where you are in a rebuild. You bring in a 5-star quarterback, that kind of assists your recruiting in its own right, so you don't need as many recruiting staff members. Is that fair to say that this could be a year-to-year process just based on where the program is at, that determines where you need more hands on deck, if you will?
Absolutely. Okay. And they're still in a period of transition. Not just, they're through the first stages of the transition. The roster is now very much turned over from what we saw a year ago. The staff, as far as the assistant coaches, are set. This is totally normal to have one new assistant coach come on at the end of a year. You look at highly successful, top functioning programs in college football. Some of them lose 6-7 assistant coaches a year. Some of the very best. I mean, look at what Saban did to his staff after every season. And I'm not saying that's the case with Matt Rule. It's not like he's just pumping out NFL coaches and college coaches, but on a smaller level, that's the operation that he desires to run, where his employees, his coaches and staffers get opportunities to advance. And with that, he gets an opportunity to kind of redefine how he wants to structure things. So like you mentioned, Elijah, it's most efficient with the current setup of the roster and the program.
Guys, it's been nothing but frigid and wind chill and ice here in Nebraska here the last several days. Next time, this time of year, a year from now, can we do this late to mid-January show in Hawaii? Can we just book that? Can we write that? Can we go to next year's Polynesian Bowl? Yeah, the Polynesian Bowl episode. This year, you've got Dylan Raiola and Carter Nelson soaking up the sun and throwing bombs. What a film footage on Twitter with the 70-plus yarders once, now twice from Dylan. But we should be doing the show from there.
We missed our opportunity this year. They're not going to have a 5-star quarterback in the Polynesian Bowl next year, I don't think. So we should be there. I mean, can we? I'm just ready to just drive to the airport right now, to be honest with you, as I look outside. It's been horrendous. In some ways, it's good that Dylan Raiola didn't have to experience this at Nebraska, or, well, I'm not even going to say it, but he's in the homeland, in the Raiola homeland, in the Pacific, really enjoying himself, and I think Nebraska fans will enjoy watching him on Friday night. But we need to find out a way, while Matt Rule and Donovan Raiola are out in the islands this week. Of course, it's a recruiting period. They're going to take advantage of this opportunity to go see some juniors, some 25 recruits at the high schools out there. let's get some of those guys on into the Nebraska recruiting class for 2025 and committed to the Polynesian Bowl for next year. So there's a reason to be able to pay attention up close. We dropped the ball. We dropped the ball this year and not going out there to see Dylan, because how many times, and this is a serious question, how many times in these All-Star games, whether it's the Under Armour game or the All-American Bowl that Carter Nelson and Grant Bricks and Gibson Pyle played in a couple weeks ago, how many times do you get to see a quarterback, or really any position, who is atop the depth chart at his college playing in a high school All-Star game? I've covered some of these things, and I don't ever remember it happening. And that is the case right now. If you had a depth chart that came out right now for the UTEP game, Dylan Raiola is QB1, and he's playing Friday night on the NFL Network in the Polynesian Bowl. So it's a unique experience for sure, and I'm looking forward to watching it.
And I know Raiola gets the headlines, but I would like to make a note, like how wild a week this must be for Carter Nelson to go from playing 8-man football in Ainsworth to now practicing at a high school football field in Hawaii, beautiful Hawaii, getting to practice out there and play with some of the best in the country. That's got to be a really, really cool experience. I know Raiola is going to get the headlines, but I just want to make a note of that, how different it is to play football in Ainsworth than it is in Hawaii. That's got to be awesome.
Yeah, I can't. It's good for Carter, and he got to go to San Antonio and play in the All-American Bowl too, and made a catch down there. And
no offense to San Antonio. San Antonio ain't Hawaii though.
It is not. The Riverwalk cannot hold the candle to, wherever he's going, Waikiki in Hawaii this week. Also, Preston Taumua, the offensive line commit from the great state of Hawaii, the top prospect in Hawaii, who will be coming to Nebraska in May. He's waiting. He's not an early enrollee. There are most of this class, more than half of this class is enrolling early next week. Shockingly, the kid from Hawaii is not one of them. He's going to wait until May when things warm up to come start his schoolwork.
He got a hold of the Farmer's Almanac and made his second semester senior season plans after that. I'm wondering when Matt Rule and Donald Raiola go out there, if they're taking pictures with them of the current state of Nebraska, if they're saying that that's white sand beaches in Lincoln, and that's what, when they go down to Florida and talk to those kids, that, just white sand just covering the capital city right now. You'll feel right at home if you can.
Right. White sand and 30 below wind chills is a
we're all apparently at a lake house then, right? As we look outside.
Well, if you're just taking pictures of Nebraska, like pictures don't do it justice to how hell it is. If you look at a beautiful winter landscape, you go, wow, that looks stunning, immaculate. It's from a painting. And then you're standing out there in your Carhartt and your 6 layers and you go, this isn't as fun anymore. I wish this was just a picture. So the picture could be a good selling point, actually.
But Elijah, you're not making a selling point to be part of the recruiting staff right now at all. Talking about your 6 layers and the hell, the frozen hell of the last few days weather.
It just prepares you for a January playoff game in Kansas City. Is all it is. It's all about how you sell it.
Yeah,
right. If you're going to play in the NFL someday, you've got to be used to this kind of weather. I will be interested someday when we get to talk to the likes of Larry Tarver, Willis McGahee IV, Vincent Shavers, and Ja'Cory Barney. Those are the 4 from Miami who are now here living in Lincoln, and they will tell the story. They will tell the story to their grandchildren about how they came to college at Nebraska and they showed up and it was 30 below wind chill or 50 below wind chill, whatever ridiculous number the temperature got to on the weekend, their first weekend ever at Nebraska. I think I would have just turned around and left. If you just take me back to the airport right now. You guys said nothing about this kind of weather when you recruited me. What is this? I have to walk to the stadium and walk to class. So
we do have guys, today, as we record this on Tuesday afternoon, poor Ethan Nation from Georgia tweeting out, I didn't know it was that easy to get stuck in the snow 2 days in a row. So he's getting a welcome to Nebraska here this week as well.
But good on those guys like, Ja'Cory Barney and Willis McGahee IV. those guys were committed to Nebraska for a long time. Tarver was at 24 hours before signing day commitment flip. But, McGahee and Barney, they thought, sure, when he committed to Nebraska, I think most people would have probably put a prop bet on that he would flip back or pick another Florida school, if not for Miami. But good on those guys to remain committed. They knew what they were getting into when they got here. Maybe not as extreme, but they probably had a decent idea. But I was always impressed by that. McGahee was one of the first guys in this class to pledge, and he stuck with it. So
I'm sure Willis McGahee III, his father, who played in the NFL for quite some time and played at Miami as a college player. I'm sure he shared with Willis some memories and experiences of his own of maybe playing at Lambeau Field or the Meadowlands or Buffalo and son. It's not going to all be sunshine. And the earlier in your career you can experience that, then the more ready you're going to be when you get to the place that you want to go at the end.
Guys, let's wind down. It's the Average Joe Sports Show, episode 26, the AJ Sports Pod, where you can find us on Twitter, the AJ Sports Show. Watch the show on YouTube and Spotify and iTunes to download and take with you as well. A lot of changes in college football since we last talked. I'm trying to do the math here. Did we get the Saban bomb last episode or not? Someone refresh me.
I don't think we've talked about it. Yeah.
No, Saban obviously retires. You have Kalen DeBoer making the move from Washington as Greg Byrne quick to get that signature. And here's the celebration in Tuscaloosa Saturday for Kalen DeBoer. Fish, who I love Fish at Arizona, making the move up to Washington. The domino effect, very real. And it'll be interesting to see how year one goes for DeBoer. I don't doubt he's an incredible coach, but that's a set of stones to take on that shadow and walk into that monster that is Alabama.
Just a quick take on that. How about Greg Byrne getting the opportunity to do at Alabama what his father did not get the opportunity to do at Nebraska? Bill Byrne, when Tom Osborne retired in 1997, you guys all know, he didn't get to hire the next coach. That was selected by the outgoing guy. And if anybody in college football today ever earned the opportunity to pick his successor, it's Nick Saban. And Greg Byrne, that did not happen with Greg Byrne. He went out and had a very quick search. They talked to all of Jimmy Sexton's guys and at least all of his big guys, and they ended up with one of them in Kalen DeBoer getting on that plane in Seattle. And did you see the airport in Tuscaloosa when he landed? We think that we are passionate about football here in Lincoln and around Nebraska, and we most definitely are, but it is a different level. And I think the 8 national championships over the past 15 years or 7, whatever it is, that has a lot to do with it. But Kalen DeBoer walked off that plane and into a different universe.
Not only did Greg Byrne get to make the hire, but he also got to make the announcement in person and not over the phone from wherever Bill Byrne was alleged to have been when he named Frank Solich, or made the announcement that Frank Solich was Nebraska's new head football coach. That was quite the moment.
To play revisionist history, I wonder how different Husker football looks in 2024 if Bill Byrne does get to make that hire and pick who he wants. I wonder.
Who would he? What are the names? Did Bill want Francione or Urban? I mean, were those the 2 names?
Bill, I'm sure you know the answer, and you know what I'm going to say, and you know that the guy on the piece of paper in Bill's top drawer of his desk was Mack Brown, and this was Mack Brown pre-Texas, Mack Brown of North Carolina. So if you can just think about the success and the personality that Mack Brown had and took to Texas over that decade where Nebraska floundered and struggled. And, you know, it wasn't all bad, of course, under Frank Solich, but there was somewhat of a downward trajectory despite his fantastic record in 6 seasons as the coach. It would have been Mack Brown would have brought a different dynamic. Absolutely. And I do think that's probably the guy that Bill Byrne would have zeroed in on. Does he get him? I don't know.
Wasn't there another guy that had been at Michigan State in Toledo that was kind of on the rise?
You talking about Nick Saban?
Oh, okay. Maybe that's who it was. I thought that there was kind of an unknown guy that was also on Bill Byrne's radar at the time. The thing about Brown, and I do remember Mac Brown's name being bandied about a little bit. I shouldn't say bandied, more in secret. There was an established presence that Mac Brown had at that time that Frank Solich would have, no matter how great of an assistant coach and well-known that he was, that presence was going to have to be built and established, and Brown had already had that. But that's revision for sure.
That's what I wonder if Kalen DeBoer has, and a fantastic coach from his time at Sioux Falls all the way through to the Fresno, and he was at Indiana as an assistant, and what he's done at Washington in 2 years is remarkable. But does he have that presence? Does he have the ability to succeeding Nick Saban is, wow. It's similar to Osborne, and in some ways it might be even a greater challenge. Saban's legacy is untouched, just about. Maybe Bear Bryant, and look how long it took Alabama to find the right guy to ultimately be the replacement long-term for Bear Bryant. So we'll see. It's going to be fascinating to watch. One thing about Saban that I do want to add, and I want to direct our listeners to The Athletic. We have a story out on Tuesday on the site, anecdotes about Nick Saban through his career, and all of our writers were encouraged to go and seek out an anecdote or two about Nick Saban. And I made a call to one of all of your favorite people, George Darlington, last week, and I asked George about playing Michigan State in 95 and 96. And those games were blowouts in Nebraska's favor. Nebraska is the only school that Nick Saban coached against more than once and did not beat. And it was because of those two games right there in 95 and 96. And George had a fantastic story about getting called back to East Lansing in the offseason after Nebraska went to East Lansing in 95 and beat the pants off of Michigan State. And he went back and he gave a clinic to the defensive coaches, and then he went and had dinner at Saban's house with Nick and Terry Saban. And you have to read it. I'm not going to spoil it, but you have to read it because George came back with an all-time great story about having dinner at Nick and Terry Saban's house in East Lansing in the winter of 1995-96. So go check it out.
Was George wearing a Hawaiian shirt at dinner?
He might have been. He may have come right off the plane from Hawaii and somehow gotten a direct flight from Honolulu to East Lansing so he could get in and talk to the Spartans defensive coaches.
Somebody has to write the George Darlington, not just book, anthologies. And being the fact that Mitch is the expert writer amongst us, I'm just going to throw that to him, because I would give that out for Christmas gifts for many, many years, with all the stories that people have, A, about George Darlington, and the stories that B, George Darlington has about George Darlington. That would be an amazing read that not just Nebraska fans, but I think anybody in the college football community would just eat up for years. I think that, he's like the Jimmy Buffett of college football coaches. There's just something about him that is just everlasting. And I would love to have all of his stories chronicled somehow, some way. But, I'm sure George has a great one. The thing about Alabama, real quick, and good on Bill Byrne, so many times when Alabama has had to make a coaching change, they've gone into the Alabama family, and it hasn't worked out that way outside of Gene Stallings. But when Bear Bryant retired, they went after Ray Perkins, NFL guy, medium success. That didn't last long. Eventually they got Stallings, who won a national title. Then they went with Mike DuBose, who, I think was
they were good, and then they got put in jail.
Yeah. And you had Shula. It just so much where they kept going, we got to get an Alabama guy. But when they went after somebody who wasn't Nick Saban, things turned out pretty well. And Byrne went with, a guy who was a proven good, great football coach. But I go back to demeanor. I think Kalen DeBoer has the demeanor to withstand the kind of pressure that's going to be coming his way. And I would imagine Alabama fans are understanding that they're not going to go 14 and 15 and 0 for the next several years. Eventually, they're going to demand it, but they might accept a loss or two here and there.
Pretty good hire. We're cheering for Kalen, Midwest guy, and that is going to be fun to see how things shake out. So we wind out episode 26. I don't think we'll sing, but we do need to say happy birthday, day late, belated birthday as we tape, to the Pride of Fairbury, NBC Sports, the Professor
happy
Bill
birthday,
Doleman.
Bill.
Hey, thank you very much.
As Bill's like, yep, came back to this.
Yep.
So, but no, awesome stuff. And thanks for tuning in and checking us out. The AJ Sports Pod on Twitter, the AJ Sports Show on YouTube for the Average Joe Sports Show, Spotify and iTunes. Elijah Herbel, Bill Doleman, Mitch Sherman with The Athletic. Chris Schmidt. We'll talk to you next time.